Good afternoon and welcome to our alumni panel marking the 40th anniversary celebration of the Center for Public History. I'm Dr. Nancy Beck-Young, John and Rebecca Morse Professor of History and Director of the Center for Public History at the University of Houston, and I am delighted that you have chosen to spend part of your day with us. At the Center for Public History, our mission is to ignite understanding of our diverse pasts by collaborating with and training historically minded students, practitioners, and the public through community-driven programming and scholarship. Since 1984, we have created collaborative research projects with university and community partners to generate research that is local and global. As public historians, we are committed to doing history for and with the communities of which we are a part. We do this in three ways. First, we train graduate and undergraduate students in public history methods, values, and ethics, and prepare them for a variety of careers in the public humanities. Second, through public-facing projects like Houston History Magazine, the podcast Public Historians at Work, and numerous CPH research projects like Sharing Stories from 1977, La Louisiane and Tejas, Sirios, and Algorithms and Power Systems Architecture, scholars, students, and community members work together to document our rich community histories. And third, through public programming under the CPH Lecture Series, we strive to make history matter in Houston by sponsoring lectures, workshops, discussions, and seminars that speak to the value of the humanities in the professions and in the public. In this session, we will hear from a talented cross-section of our alumni. Students who have gone through our program work in archives, they work in museums, they are in historic preservation, they teach in universities, they work for the National Park Service, and they do so much more. Our panelists will share with us their career trajectories and their thoughts on the field of public history. And now let me make the introductions. Dr. Todd Romero received his PhD from Boston College. He is going to moderate the panel. He is Associate Professor in the Department of History and Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies at the University of Houston. He researches and teaches classes on early American, Native American, public, and food history. Romero is the author of numerous articles and an important local history book. For his teaching, Romero has twice been awarded, once the Provost Core Teaching Award and once the Ross M. Lentz Award for Teaching Excellence in the Humanities. Mikaela Selley is a native Houstonian with over 3 decades of experience as an archivist specializing in the preservation of Hispanic and Latino heritage records. She is a graduate of UH with an MA in public history. Selley works as an independent consultant offering research planning, archival, and exhibit design services for cultural heritage projects. She is also archivist and program manager for the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage Project at Arte Publico Press. Jovan Slaughter is the grant manager for the CDC Health Disparities Grant and engagement strategist with the North Carolina Division of Public Health, and he's safe to be here today. Since 2022, Jovan has worked with NCDHHS in various capacities, including program management, marketing and community liaison, curriculum development, and auxiliary support. A native of North Carolina and the U.S. Army, Slaughter is a graduate of North Carolina Central University and UH. Jovan is also a trained chef. Yes. Debbie Griggs Carter is one of the first graduates of the public history program. Her career has included archival and museum work with NASA's history program, the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum, and the National Museum of American History, and the National Archives. Sandra Enriquez is Associate Professor of History and Director of the Public History Emphasis at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Enriquez is completing her first book about grassroots activism in El Paso. She has curated and collaborated on several community-engaged public scholarship projects highlighting the histories of Kansas City's Latinx and Black communities. She currently serves as Associate Director for the UMKC Mellon Humanities Internship Program. And last but not least, Dr. Caitlyn Jones is a National Park Service Mellon Humanities postdoctoral fellow at the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument in Washington, D.C. While completing her PhD in women's history at UH, she worked for the Sharing Stories from 1977 Project, Houston History Magazine, the City of Houston Historic Preservation Office, and the National Museum of American History. Now let me turn the floor over to Dr. Romero, who will lead our discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Young. It's such a pleasure to be here and see so many friendly faces, some that I see every day and some I haven't seen for a while, and it's such an honor to be with this group of public historians. We're going to start with what drew you to public history. I'm an accidental public historian, so I'm interested to learn what people who are very intentional about their career paths, what drew them to this particular field. And why don't we start with you, Sandra,
Okay.
and we'll move.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here today with y'all. In thinking about this question, I always invite people to my public history classes and ask them about their origin story, right? And only to realize that until I was invited to this panel, I had not thought about my own origin story, which is a little bit silly. But I think that I've always been an oral historian, but a public historian at heart. My family really enjoys talking about family history and local history, especially during the holidays when we're making food. And so I've always been drawn to family stories and to kind of oral traditions and how families pass histories, right, about the places that they live or their own parents and so on and so forth. When I was a master's student at the University of Texas at El Paso, I just happened to enroll in a public history class, and I've been interested ever since then in a more trained way. So when I moved to Houston, although I wasn't a public history minor through CPH, I was completely invested in it in different ways, through classes and projects and other things, because the work that I wanted to do needed it. I would not be able to do the research that I wanted to do without having that oral history training, without having that public history training, without connecting in meaningful ways with the communities that I read about and that I engage with and that I work collaboratively with. So that's my origin story.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Debbie, and I grew up traveling on family vacations, and we would visit presidential libraries, historic sites, historic towns, and that was just really important. And when the LBJ library opened up, I remember visiting it soon after, and maybe many of you have been there, and there's this two or three story level glass, and you can see the storage area with those beautiful boxes. And that just like, I don't know, but this is the most beautiful place, and I want to work here. I want to work with these boxes. This is like, it's 8 years old, I decided. And I went on to major in history at Stephen F. Austin, and taught for a year at Spring Branch High School, and thought, I love teaching, but I really want to get my master's, and I don't want to spend 5 years doing it. And that was right about the time that I saw an announcement in the one of the historical journals that the U of H was starting up the public history program. I applied, and so that's really kind of where it's like I didn't want to necessarily teach or write and publish, and I wanted to do museum and archives, which is what I've been lucky enough to have been doing.
Thank you. Caitlyn?
Hi, everybody. I'm Caitlyn. What drew me to public history? Confederate statues. I got my undergrad at the University of North Texas in journalism, and I was working for a paper in Denton, Texas, called the Denton Record Chronicle. and there was a Confederate statue on the courthouse square in Denton, and there was a big discussion about what to do with the statue. And I realized then that I wasn't able to engage in the way that I wanted to working for the newspaper in discussions on these statues, because I was really interested in the history, how the statue got to be there. It was the United Daughters of the Confederacy. It was not even a particularly artistic statue. It was a Sears catalog statue. But I wanted to be part of those conversations in a different way than I was able to as a newspaper reporter, for instance, giving context about, when that statue was erected at the same time, a thriving Black community was being displaced, and for the, Texas Women's University to be built. There were, a sizable Klan presence in the area. There was lynchings going on. And so to bring that context as a historian was something that I really wanted to do. And I didn't have the language of public history until I found out about the UH program. I knew from what I understood of history, yes, there were museums, archives, I understood all of that, but I didn't really understand all of the different ways that historians can engage with the public. From my understanding, my mother is a U.S. history teacher, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't be like my mother. But also, I wasn't really that interested in teaching. But this program really gave me the language to identify what I wanted to do, and then also to see all the different ways that history scholarship is presented to the public, and gave me kind of, a path forward.
Thank you, Mika.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mika. So I definitely grew up as a library kid every weekend after school, museums as well. But I didn't know anything about archives, really, until the University of Houston. I was an undergraduate work-study student who found myself working at the UH Special Collections, and that's where I developed a very strong interest in archival work, both behind the scenes, processing, organizing records, but then also the public-facing work, so the outreach and programming aspect. And a staff member suggested I look into the public history program, and I realized it really fit in with everything that I was really wanting to do. I think I was drawn to the community engagement and the storytelling aspect and the public in public history. I was a communications major as an undergrad, and my concentration was in public relations, and originally I thought my path was going to take me to PR for nonprofits. I really liked this idea of helping organizations with beautiful missions tell their stories. And then when I fell into the archival field, I realized I want to help bring archival records to life and tell stories in that way. And so I relish in the challenge of communicating a history in a way that is both impactful, respectful, and complete in all perspectives. And I think public history just said all of that to me when I read about the program, and I thought, this is exactly what I'm wanting to do. I think I have the skills to start that program, and this program is going to help me build everything that I'm missing. And so it was that storytelling aspect that really drew me in.
Thank you. Jovan?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I guess I'm only somewhat purposeful in what drew me into public history. Mainly a lot of serendipity. For myself, history was always my favorite subject in school. Didn't really care for STEM type stuff. It was always history and English for the most part. But what drew me to public history was kind of just by chance. The common through line with everything that I've done in my life has been, I would say, service and public service for the most part. After graduating high school, it was just kind of like, what do you want to major in college? Nobody really knows. And then I said, all right, I'm going to join the Army. So I did that, and then after the Army, I was thinking about what decision is going to be next. It's kind of like that pivot moment where you're like, okay, this chapter is done, what's next? And then with a full GI Bill behind me, I said, I'm going to study what I always wanted to do and just do things that I like. So I went to culinary art school, and then I was more drawn into the history of food more so than cooking food. And so, even though I enjoyed cooking food, I was always into like, what's the story behind the food? Like, why is it that we eat this? And like, just kept asking my professors questions, and they're like, sounds like you need to go and enroll in a history program. So that's exactly what I did, and that's what led me to studying history. I finished my bachelor's in history, and that's when I got my first taste of public history. One of my professors, the chair of the grad department at my undergraduate institution, started teaching public history courses, and I didn't even know it existed. And through like a lot of public-facing research and going out in the community, that's all my bag right there. I love shaking hands and touching people and learning the stories about what's really going on from the folks themselves. And that just kind of continued to matriculate into the other ways in which history has an intersection with so many parts of our lives. That allowed me to get a fellowship after graduating at the Louis Armstrong House Museum in Queens, New York, and I learned so much more there. And from there, I just was like, okay, I want to continue down this pathway of public history, and that's how I discovered University of Houston and everything that they had going on down here, and took my shot. I didn't, I learned so much, and that's kind of like just very organic pathway that led me into public history. But I would say the main thing that drew me to it was that it was the combination of something I already had a genuine interest and love for with the kind of common thread that I had been following my whole life.
Thank you so much, Jovan. What I love about this group of alums is that it represents, I think, the diversity of the field. We've got people working in archives, people who work in a lot of different corners of public history. I have sort of a two-part question that, if it so moves you, please do share perhaps your favorite memory of public history at UH, and then also any advice you'd give to current students. So a high point and lessons learned. As the spirit strikes you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I guess I'll go first. So, to me, I think that one of my favorite memories, and it's a silly one, so I hope it makes sense. But it was taking this oral history class with Dr. Monica Perales that has just shaped my life in so many ways. I can explain that part later. But we were working for the for the Gulf Coast Food Project as part of the class, and we were tasked with doing oral histories as a group. And so it was graduate students were conducting the oral histories, and undergrads who were in comp studies were doing kind of the recording, kind of the filmmaking part of it, which I thought was a genius idea. Anyway, the day to conduct the first oral history gets here, and my group was doing farm to table, so we drive out to Waller, Texas. I had never been to Waller, but I think I haven't been back to Waller ever since. We get there, we meet the owners of what is now Blue Heron Farm. They do goat cheese and other products. And we ask, where do you want to conduct the oral history? And they say, out here in the field. And so we're like, oh, this is technically fieldwork, right? So it was fantastic. It was a lovely day, but the funny part, and I was kind of having an anxious, kind of anxiety attack, an anxious moment as I was conducting this oral history, because the goats were just completely driven to wanting to know more about the cameras and the tripod. So at some point, one of them got too close that it almost knocked the camera from there, and it made it a silly moment, but I think that it helped kind of calm my nerves, right? It made me to think, it kind of pushed me to out of my comfort zone to be thinking fast, right? Like, it's not only listening to what the narrator was telling me about how they, decided to leave their corporate communication jobs at the Galleria to then begin, a goat farm, technically. But also, thinking to listen, but also to make sure that the goats were not messing with the equipment that wasn't ours, right? It was the university's, and as a, grad student, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I hope we don't damage the equipment. So that was, and to this day, I think about that oral history, and I was so glad that it was one of my kind of first oral histories that I did, because it is just so, I don't know, brings joy to my heart all the time. And then to say the second part of the question, which was any advice that I would give people, try to find as many potential opportunities as you can, because you just never know what you will find in the process. So oftentimes we come into graduate school, or we come to school thinking like we know exactly what we want to do, or we're going to be able to fall in line and in place into our professions in our head, and then something happens, and maybe we have to course direct, right? But this is also an opportunity for you to explore potential other careers, right? And as you see from this panel, public history in of itself is very diverse too, right? And at a time when people, downplay the value of the humanities and of history especially as well, history is very marketable, right? And public history gives you an opportunity to explore the many different ways that you can use the knowledge and the methods and skills that you're learning, right, in the classroom, and apply them in different ways, right? And that's something that I would recommend. Just try to find as many opportunities to find what you like to do and also what you don't like to do.
I'll go next. My favorite memory, and really the most amazing, it really exposed me to a lot of new areas and what things I didn't have backgrounds in, was my internship at the Johnson Space Center with the professor who was planning on writing the space station program history, Dr. Roger Bilstein at U of H CLC. And during that time, I was his research assistant. I went into the records that they kept, the records management office, and did some research of my own, and attended the first meeting between the US and European Space Agency officials. And my name, they had you sign, even though I was like, sitting in for history. But so my name is on the list of the group that met for the first time. And one funny thing and one not funny, in 1985-86 time period, I went to one of the meetings, and they had a video conference with NASA, so like the NASA officials in headquarters. And so it was like, 1985, nobody knew what this was. And they had a wall, and you could see the people in DC, and here we were, and they could see us. And that was like 1985. So I was like, oh my God, that's amazing, years later. And then the other thing, I was there for the Challenger. And what that was like on site, and got to be there when President Reagan came and to attend the memorial service. So, so sometimes it's things that you would never have imagined you would be at. And my advice, somewhat similar to the previous person's, is basically learn the basics of historical research so that you can research in any topic. I mean, I've researched the 82nd Airborne for the Korean War, and I've researched space thing that I have no technical knowledge of, and just whatever field it is, the opportunities there, just learn your historical research. And then consider opportunities in fields you don't have a background in, outside your comfort zone. And so just go with it. And then consider, I've gone with federal service, starting off with even the federal contractor at Johnson Space Center. And so that's just led me to 35 years now of federal government. And also the other thing I can't, and works for government, is basic, clear writing skills. That's so important. And so, yeah.
I think this echoes what the other panelists were saying. I got to do so many internships and so many projects while I was at UH, and I spent 5 years working on the Sharing Stories from 1977 project and doing feminist digital humanities research. And I wouldn't be in the position that I am now had I not worked on that project, because I got to do so many things. I got to do very in-depth and sometimes tedious data cleaning, but that's a good skill to have. I got to do public-facing writing. I got to moderate panels. I got to work with archives on digitizing things, building digital exhibits. So I was able to cultivate a wide skill set from that. But I think a moment, too, that I constantly look back on that was so fun was doing the Public Historians at Work podcast. So it was during the pandemic, and everybody was just, it was the pandemic. We were all so tired, and it felt like the world was collapsing. But I took a digital museums class with Dr. Christina Neumann, and she came up with this project where we would use various archival resources and oral histories to talk about the history of Third Ward. And I got to do a podcast about the history of Emancipation Park. And so that was really a way to get information, good historical information out to people at a time when it felt like, what is history going to look like now in this crazy world that we're living in? And it was fun to do. My fiance got really into it. He helped set up the microphones, and we turned our closet into like a little studio space. So he's very proud of it, just like I am. And it was just a really wonderful experience that I had never thought about before, but now I have this skill of putting together a podcast. And as far as advice for current students, I think doing as much as you can while you're here is probably like the best advice. But I would say that make sure what you're doing is collaborative, because in any sort of public history realm, you're going to collaborate with a lot of different people, whether they be from your office, whether they be community members, whether they other stakeholders, educators, all different types of people working together on this project. And I think that's where public history is a little bit different than traditional academia. It's not about a single authored monograph. It's not about this singular focus of doing your research. And while that research helps us tell these public-facing stories, you have to be able to work with people. It's not about you in public history. And so remember that as you're doing your training, make sure that you cultivate those skills of working with others. Yeah.
So the most impactful memory is definitely my internship with the Houston Public Library. That led me to an incredible career journey at the Houston Public Library, working as a city archivist. And that was a valuable experience that would not have happened without the internship. My favorite memory has to do with food. And if you know me, that makes sense. There was a course with Dr. Romero about food history, and we were looking at Creole versus Cajun food and the social history behind that. And we ended with dinner at Brennan's, and I felt so special. And I felt it was really this incredible opportunity. We got to sit in the special booth where you could see the kitchen, but beyond what was on the plate and the special moment, it was everything that was leading up to that. So this was researching and learning about the public history projects and oral history projects and documentaries that focus on food history and the powerful ways they tell those stories, and then doing an interview. I got to interview one of the head chefs at Brennan's, Chef Arevalo, I think was his name, and he was from El Salvador, and he had worked from starting out as a dishwasher, making it all the way up to head chef, had this incredible story. So then to end up with this dinner at Brennan's where all of this research is floating in my head and his words are I'm thinking about all his stories. It was a lesson to me in the what does public history, what can it feel like, right? So like those experiences. And when planning these projects, what do we want people to feel and walk away with? How can we make an impact in a very real impact in those ways as they experience and as they engage with history? And I never forget a great meal. So, in terms of advice, this is something I'm still working on today, but figuring out a system on how to keep your contacts in place, and not just email addresses and phone numbers, but what you talked about when you met them. What are they researching? What are their interests? What's the personality? What is that impression? Because just like Caitlyn was explaining, you're going to work with so many different types of people, and you're going to come across grant projects. You're going to come across opportunities where you're going to think, I need someone, or I know someone, or I met someone, and you may not even need that person for yourself, but you become maybe a connector of people, and that's something that I've felt so proud to be able to bring people together and then just kind of see what happens later on, and I had a part in that because I wrote that person's name down at the right time, or I kept their business card in the right place where I could find it in my purse. So I think having a real system of just organizing your contacts, it sounds really boring, but I promise you it's such a helpful skill that is transferable for whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm probably going to echo a lot of the same sentiments as the fellow panelists here, but quite frankly, I had an amazing time in grad school, all things considered. I came here in the middle of a pandemic where we were uncertain about a lot of things. But over the 2 years that I was here at University of Houston, being able to be a research assistant at the Center for Public History, so many amazing things. I had classes with Caitlyn. We made podcasts, and that's probably one of the favorite memories I've had amongst many things. But if I had to say what was the most my favorite, it's kind of a tie. It would be working with the community, where the same project we did, the Third Ward history. Sorry, stumbling over my words here. Podcast, and one of the things that I was very grateful for was that Dr. Neumann was gracious enough to allow me to actually go out into the community. I had a different idea in which I was like, hey, if we're going to look at the Third Ward, like what's actually still remaining in Third Ward that we can see, that we can touch. And for anybody that's familiar with the area around here, Cream Burger's right across from the campus. And so I approached the owners one day and was like, hey, I'm a grad student. You probably don't know what I'm doing right now. There's a long line behind me and people wanting to order food. And I was like, but I would like to do a podcast about this, your family-run institution. And she's just like, yeah, that's all fine, but what do you want to eat? So, but that was a really good experience because I had to really earn that. I had to come back a couple times and get up early in the morning. I worked as a chef, so I know exactly how annoying it can be when someone is trying to ask you questions that has nothing to do with your prep work. So, but getting to know the family members, the Greenwoods, and them being gracious enough to give me 15 minutes of their time, it turned into a wonderful podcast, and had a lot of ups and downs throughout that experience, but it really showed me, just how much fun you can have with public history. There was many other things that I did here. I was able to do an internship with the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum. I was able to do many oral histories while I was there, being able to talk to many different veterans who served from the Korean War all the way up into Desert Storm. So it was a lot of these ways in which my own personal background was able to intersect. And I would say the other memory that tied so closely, or I should say was a favorite of mine, is being able to work with Dr. Romero for my on-campus internship, if you will, where I was able to interview Jason and Star Harry, and they're really great people. And this was in conjunction with Dr. Romero's work with Creole and Cajun people in Texas. And I grew up in North Carolina, but my family's not from there. My family's from Louisiana, from New Orleans, and also from like the kind of like the country parts of Louisiana, little small towns probably nobody's heard of before. But being able to be here, find myself here in Houston, and then being able to meet other folks from Louisiana who came from, Acadiana area, and listen to their history and what their understanding of what Creole versus Cajun is, and how that played a role into my own understanding of what I perceive these ethnic backgrounds to be, was just totally blown. I was just like, I had this such narrow view of what something that I grew up around, and my whole understanding of that was just expanded through the research that I was able to participate in. So that was, two very personal things I got out of being here. My advice, similar to theirs, but what I would say is, and I mean this sincerely, is take your training seriously here. Do the work and do it with intention, and do not be afraid to go to your professors and ask, how can I improve? How can I be better? How can I work on what's weak in my skill set as a historian or as a burgeoning historian? Right now I work in public health, which is completely like left from public history. But one of the things that has helped me so much so far in my career in public health is that as a historian, we're naturally seeing so many different connections between how does this connect to this, how does this connect to that, the research background, the writing skills that you need, to be being analytical, people think we're just writing all the time, but there's a large, not just qualitative, but quantitative aspect to the work that we do as well. And being in close collaboration as well. I've worked with folks from epidemiologists to people who have sociology backgrounds, social workers. There's so many people you're going to interact with within the workforce, and being able to utilize your skill sets, and that is what's going to be that thing that connects you to these folks, where you can work with them and work effectively and efficiently. And especially when you're doing any type of state work, government work, federal work, as you know, you're going to need to be able to get clear communication with folks so that you can be effective at your job. And I think my training here has just catapulted me leagues beyond a lot of my other colleagues that I work with who don't have the same training or skills as I do, and it's been very helpful for me. Yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. One of the things that those comments remind me is how blessed we are in the Center for Public History over time of working with such talented students that do wonderful work. And one of the things I'm curious about as we shift gears from your time in the program is how you started your careers after you graduated, what advice you'd have, and sort of what wouldn't you do, and what would you do again and again and again?
I guess I'll start us off.
Yeah, you're always at the end.
Yeah, I would say so funny story, I'll tell you. Working with all of the folks at the Center for Public History, but mainly spent a lot of time with Dr. Wes Jackson, and I was kind of at a crossroads in my second year, and I said, okay, do I want to try and go down the PhD pathway, or do I just want to go into the workforce? And it became very clear it's not fun being a broke grad student. So I wanted to enter the workforce, and I used to tell Dr. Jackson, my goal is to be gainfully employed after I'm done with this program, and that's exactly what happened. And so having that in mind is really what was super important and key in helping me, and looking at what are my career prospects from here. I was able to enter public health through a federal grant that was for health disparities that the CDC had gave out to numerous states in the wake of COVID. And the role that I had applied for was education coordinator. And I was looking at this long description of what this job was, and I said, I can do about 85% of this, and the other bit I'm probably gonna have to finesse a little bit, but just once, and I'm a strong believer in this, and this goes back to the training we have as historians, but if you can just kind of get a chance to like sit down with somebody and get that seat, you can pretty much show them that you're capable of doing what you need to do. And so that's what I would say is probably just being very intentional and knowing that it's not necessarily about I need to do this thing or like I have to find a job in this field or it has to align with this. It's knowing what skills that you have and how you can apply them to different scenarios and different situations. That's going to be that's I would say is the best way to kind of look at things. Is don't limit yourself, don't narrow yourself to just this one box that literally the world is your oyster, and you can do anything with the exception of being a lawyer or a doctor. Those are two very specific things, but outside of that, I honestly think you can do anything. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I sometimes I forget this, but I wasn't accepted into graduate school the first time around because my major wasn't history, my minor was history, and it was a very real moment. I was a straight A student for a long time. I had done well, and it was my first sort of reality check. And I really questioned whether I even belonged in graduate school. Maybe I just don't have what it takes. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I should do something completely different with my life. But I had some really great mentors who talked me into doing post-bac courses and proving myself and applying again, and I'm so glad that I did. Dr. Guadalupe San Miguel sat down with me and said, you can do this. Take the course, prove yourself, apply again. Dr. Monica Perales was such a strong influence on me, and her having a communications background as well was so helpful for me to see, okay, others have done this, have stepped into this role from a communications background. I can do this. I have a mentor. I have someone I can follow and learn from. And so I that's what I did. And I applied, and obviously I got in the second time around. But I'm really grateful for the challenge. I think I really needed to be challenged and to push myself to do the best that I could. The internship I held led to landing a full-time position as an archivist at the Houston Public Library upon graduation in 2013. And so I spent the next 8 years learning and growing and being challenged many, many times at the city. And by 2021, I felt that it was time to move in a different direction. I felt I had given so much to that position. I felt like I had learned so much and that I was ready to kind of put my skills more into community work. There were a lot of projects landing on my desk that I couldn't say yes to in my capacity at the city. There were some limitations, and I realized I really wanted to move more in that direction and do more public history work. And so during that time, a position opened up at Recovery Program at Arte Publico Press, and I'm so grateful for that. And so I'm an archivist and program manager there, and it's been incredibly valuable to my career to work with a team that is so community-driven and really thinks outside of the box and is really engaged with the Latino community, both locally and internationally. They really live and breathe archival ethics, and that is just incredibly valuable to me personally and professionally. And then I also discovered a real passion for exhibit design in all of these years. In 11 years of doing public history work, I have found that I really like creating very public-facing exhibitions that bring archival material to life. And so I'm I just co-founded a company, a local company that'll focus on creating cultural heritage exhibits here in Houston. So I'm really excited about that. And so I've been really fortunate to, in what feels like such a short amount of time, to have dabbled in a lot of different public history projects, from oral history to consulting to exhibitions, speaking in front of classrooms, and it's all been really incredibly rewarding. I really sometimes can't believe how quickly I've gotten to this point, how fast it is gone by. In terms of what I would do different, I would reach out to people more for help. If I could go back and do it again, I would have relied more on group writing sessions and have really leaned on my colleagues. Even now, there are times that I realize in talking to someone, I'll think, man, I really didn't have to tackle that challenge alone. I could have called this person. And so I would, if I could do it again, I would really listen to myself and take my own advice. In terms of something I would do over and over again, I am proud of stepping out of my comfort zone in making an effort to be at a lot of events in Houston to learn from Houstonians, whether it's in government positions, whether it's educators, so that I am a better archivist. I want to know what's going on in my city. I want to know what the issues are, what people are thinking about, what people are talking or arguing about. And so I try as much as I can to really be present at these different spaces so that I feel like I can do the best job that I can by continuing to make connections and also really understanding how my city is changing so rapidly. Thank you.
My career trajectory has been pretty short. I finished my PhD in the spring, so I'm just kind of fresh out of the slammer on that one. But like I said before, I wouldn't be in the position that I am now without my training at UH. So I work with the National Park Service at a women's history site, and the goal of my fellowship is to kind of help update interpretation. But I'm realizing now that's so broad. The scope is so broad, and that the things that I am hopefully able to do within these 2 years, there's really no limits. And I think a lot of that came from my skill set. So everybody here, do as much as you can. My fellowship is proof that that actually pans out. Everything that I've done at UH directly correlates to the work I'm doing. I worked with the City of Houston Preservation Office, and that helped me understand preservation techniques, how to work with communities, and the importance of place in interpretation. My podcasting work was a boon to what I'm doing now. They're talking about potentially doing podcast work as part of my fellowship, and that also extends to oral histories as well, which is training that I received at UH. Working at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, I worked in the editorial department writing museum labels. That's what I'm going to be doing here at the Belmont Hall Women's History site. So all of that directly correlates, and the broad training that you can get is definitely something that I would do over. And I would also say, one thing that I did that really helped was to go beyond UH. So UH, we have wonderful programs. We've got the Center for Public History. We've got the Recovery Project. We've got the folks doing great work over in the library, Digital Humanities Corps. I'm not sure what it's called now, but the folks over at the library, they're doing great work. But that gave me the confidence to go find different avenues, both within the city and outside. So I took the initiative to go apply for the Smithsonian, I called up the city preservation department and said, do you have any internships? And they said, yes, please come help us. So all of that was really like taking the initiative to go beyond, go beyond the walls of UH and, interact with people, at this city, state, and national level. One thing I do think I would do differently is to probably expand my training in like different departments, which is kind of hard when you're a grad student. So I would have loved to have gone to the architecture department to take a course about historic preservation, because that was a lot of catch-up work that I had to do in terms of just the terminology that preservationists use in terms of architecture. And then also, Mikaela, maybe I'll call you to help, like with exhibit design. That's not something that I am familiar with. And so, potentially taking a museum studies course, or even like messing with different software, things like that. That was one thing that I wish I could have done more in my graduate training that I'm learning to do now. So it's not impossible, but these are skills that I'm working to cultivate.
So my career trajectory as being one of the first students, it's a little bit longer, but it's mostly focused beginning with the Johnson Space Center with either federal government, research assistants, or civil service in the federal sector. So once I left here and graduated, I was accepted at American University for a PhD program. And really the only thing I got out of that was my husband. And it just wasn't for me at that time. But because of my connections, there was a space history program at NASA headquarters, and so when I left AU, I worked there. There was also a research assistantship for a curator in the photo history collection, something else I didn't know anything much about, at the National Museum of American History. That led then, I went back and got my first civil service job at the National Air and Space Museum, helping with their archives. I was an archives specialist there. But then the opportunity came back. I went back to American History, and the same curator I'd worked for, he hired me when he had an opening, and that was my second federal job. So sometimes you never know where things are going to lead to. I worked there for 6 years, and then my son was born, and I really wanted to be back here and near Houston to be near my family. And at that time, the George Bush Library was getting set up in College Station, and it was as close as we could get outside Austin with keep my federal service. And I was there for 12 years, worked up to senior archivist, and helped redesign, this would have been 20 years ago, a major redesign of the library. And so I was doing research, writing text labels, finding artifacts and documents to put into the museum, and gifts and all of that. And I'd also done similar things at the National Museum of American History with the camera collection. And then I did that for 12 years, and then my husband, we really wanted to get back to DC, and there have been some opportunities here and there, and after 9/11, I really didn't want to, right after that, I didn't want to go and be there in that area. But then about 17 years ago, an opportunity came up within the Office of Presidential Libraries, and I had worked with a lot of people at George Bush Library, and they had moved to DC, and so that's where I've been the last 17 years, going on 18 years at the National Archives. So, but I would second the opportunity to do some museum studies. That would have been really useful for me. I kind of learned from other people and on the side. But I think anything else differently, sometimes the road you take isn't clear, and sometimes the getting lost is really good, like on a road trip, and you get into things you wouldn't have thought of. So you can't really plan to get to where you want to be. Sometimes it just doesn't work. It just happens, and you're at the right place at the right time. You see somebody that says, hey, would you be interested in this sort of thing? Here's somebody who needs a research assistant, or there's a job coming up, and somebody calls you up and said, hey, are you interested in this? We think you'd be really good for it. So that's my story.
So I think that during my kind of trajectory, which I will cover kind of lessons learned in the different ways that I use public history or engage with public history as a faculty member. So I graduated with my PhD from here in 2016, and I had been working the previous summer and then that following summer for an oral history project called the Civil Rights in Black and Brown Oral History Project, which was covering and doing a lot of field work and historical kind of oral history work, across Texas, and to highlight the various freedom struggle movements across the state. So I finished that. I finished my PhD here, defended my dissertation, and I was very fortunate to have a tenure-track job lined up. So I moved to Kansas City. Had never been to the Midwest or Missouri. I kind of like most of the people in the United States was like, oh, am I moving to Kansas? No, I was moving to Missouri. So, so there's two, and I will not bore you to death with that. But I was hired to continue to grow a public history program that the department that I work for had already started. The program had been growing, and students had more interest, and so they wanted to hire a second faculty member. Well, lo and behold, a year after I get there, my fellow, public historian left, and then they said, congratulations, you have now inherited in year 2 a program that you need to direct. So this is where I will kind of, highlight some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. And so, I had to direct the program, so I was responsible for not only teaching, right, public history courses, which I was already doing in the year prior, helping connect students, both undergraduate and graduates, with internships, and also, guess what? Continue my own research agenda, right? Because you had guidelines and things that you had to meet over the course of your tenure period, and so I had to learn a lot of balancing, right? It was a balancing act in so many ways. So in doing kind of my teaching, right, I kind of became, my work became just so intersectional, right? The ways that I was teaching were part of my research as well, right? And helping to build trust within a community that I was a complete outsider, right? So it took time. It took a lot of time to connect with community members, right? And public history organizations writ large, right? To get internships. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of meetings. It took a lot of building trust, right? And transparency and humility, right? And so I try to impart those same lessons to my students, right? I knew that in Kansas City, people are really excited about their history. They're very proud of their history. But that history is exclusive. That history has been harmful, and oftentimes we recognize things, right? And we recognize things like, the fact that Kansas City is a hyper-segregated city. We know it, but we don't acknowledge that history often, right? And so in training students, right, to work collaboratively with community members, we have to also teach them to recognize, right, how systemic racism has affected our communities, right? And also in recognizing how these dynamics and these relationships and these histories, right, in essence, even though we might have not been part of them, because we are representatives of a university that oftentimes also perpetuates such harms, right, that we also have to recognize that we're part of that, right? And so how do we also build relationships and build trust with communities when, even though if it wasn't, maybe someone else had done something that was harmful to a community, we're not part of it, but we're part of the university, right? And so how do we move for that? So I try to train our students, right, to acknowledge this, right? To recognize where we're coming from, when we're asked to be there, when we're not asked to be there, right? When we have to listen as collaborators, right? As people who want to be advocates for our community, right? And to hopefully impart something bigger than just doing a collaborative project about a community that hasn't been highlighted in our history, right? What does that mean? And then, in building internships, I also, try to tell my students to recognize that same work, right? It takes time, and also trying to move our kind of the culture of internships beyond unpaid work, right? We should be paying our students, and I'm very fortunate now that at least at the undergraduate level, we have been able to secure a big grant from the Mellon, which I'm helping to. I'm the associate director. I don't know why I put that in quotes, but I'm the associate director for that program, and so we're able to pay our students for doing this meaningful work that we require for our degrees, right? And then the other thing, right, is like balancing the expectations for tenure and balancing the expectations of running a public history program. Things that I wish I would have done differently, I would say, because it's wrapped into this, is advocating for myself and advocating for yourself, right? Public history work is scholarship. So how do you make sure that, even though your department or your tenure guidelines call for a book, right? Usually that's what it is. How to make sure that your public history work, which is public scholarship, that takes time, right? It's hard to quantify all that work, right? How do you make sure that it is also considered part of your scholarship beyond teaching, right? And not get dismissed as service. And then, advocating for yourself, kind of ensuring that your department, our field has already established guidelines for that, so I'm really happy about that. And then the things I could talk about balancing acts, right, and kind of labor kind of inequities along that way forever, but I will not bore you with that. But the things that I would do over and over and over again would be taking a chance to be a part of public history projects in different ways, right? Again, when I'm asked to be kind of like a collaborator, a connector, like Mika was mentioning earlier, or or just a listener to bounce off ideas as to what people would do. I think that for me, right, I'm always going to be yes to any public history work that highlights a community that is underrepresented. But also, I have to acknowledge my own positionality, right, my own capacity to conduct this work, right? And so, taking a chance whenever I know that I can do it, that I'm the person to do it, right? Or that I might be the person to connect people. So that's it.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for the panel sharing their rich and deep experience as public history professionals. If we could just take a moment to thank them before we go to Q&A. Any questions, audience?
If you can just raise your hand, I'll be glad to bring the microphone to you. There we go.
Regarding the National Archives, what particular office is charged to deliberately be proactive in securing the papers of a former president?
That's the Office of Presidential Libraries that I work for.
What actions do they typically take?
And this is generic since they've been since the Presidential Library System with FDR, for the most part. Mechanics is the Records Management Office. Packs up the materials and transfers them to the National Archives, and then eventually those records go to the presidential libraries. That's all I can say.
They don't let you run the whole place?
Hello, thank you for the panel. I do have a question. In what ways did your approach to public history kind of evolve as you learned in college compared to as you progressed through your careers?
sort of echo what Sandra was talking about in terms of like community partnerships, because I think, you know, when you're in college, you're on a semester schedule, and things move quickly because of that. Out in the workforce of public history, things do not move so quickly. And so there are, you know, several layers of, you know, different approvals, you know, and like Sandra was talking about, building these community partnerships. I think it gives me a greater appreciation of what people at CPH and my professors were doing in cultivating these community partners, the patience that's required, the trust, you know, like over, you know, the multiple meetings, the like disagreements, but coming back to the table, the establishing long-term partnerships that are not just a semester long. So making sure these are sustainable ways to move forward really helps bridge that, or bring that trust rather. And so I think developing patience as a public historian, as a collaborator, as a facilitator, that has been a skill that I am working toward now.
I'd say that a conversation that I just had yesterday with Dr. Carolina Villarroel from Arte Público Press, I'm calling her out. She said something really interesting to a class that we had visit, and she talked about knowing when the community ethics or the ethics in archival work of helping community, but also recognizing when we're not needed, and when to step back and when to pause and listen, and that in the archival field is also incredibly valuable to public history, and it requires listening. And I think I've spent the last 11 years trying to always keep that in mind, is to really listen. Even when I think I have a really great idea, it doesn't matter, and I need to make sure that and not listen to just one loud community voice. You know, we have an incredible amount of advocates here in the city that I've been grateful to work with, but they don't necessarily represent every single perspective. And the Latino perspective is diverse. You know, we don't think the same, we don't vote the same, we don't approach any of this in the same way necessarily. And so real world training and advice from mentors and colleagues has been to pause and to listen, and to to listen. And I think that has definitely evolved during my career.
Most of you work within larger institutions. What institutional barriers have you encountered that make your work difficult or sometimes impossible?
I'll start. I don't know how long you have. I'm kidding. Funding. I think that is a huge one for a variety of reasons, right? As a community partner, right? My program has been incredibly engaged in the community and has built meaningful partnerships. And oftentimes, there's limitations in the funding that we can bring to the table as a community partner, because we are a state school in a very conservative state, right? But also this funding, right, like so that could make or break projects. And oftentimes, you know, even though our community partners are not necessarily expecting us to foot the bill, right, but like we work collaboratively, it can throw a wrench, right, in the plans for a project if we have, for example, said, okay, well, there might be a promise for a renewal of, you know, of a particular pot of money for another year, right? Programs may or may not be able to be scaled up. That funding also affects internships, right, and internship opportunities as well. I'm moving away from unpaid labor. I just cannot, in good faith, send my students to the field to do internships, very meaningful work, right? They're doing professional work, so they need to be compensated. And so in getting them compensated, for example, the graduate level, right? Our graduate stipend keeps going up, and sometimes we hit limitations when community partners or other sources, right, can't keep up with making sure that we have the amount, right, that needs to be at the minimum for the graduate stipend. So I'll just leave that. That is for me, right, like funding and how much a lot of people may think that these public history projects may not take a lot of money, but they do, unfortunately, right? Whether it's exhibit work, whether there is a digital exhibit or a digital archive, right? Which, like, digitization is very expensive, and a lot of people think that it might just be, scanning some pictures, call it a day. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, just funding.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I work with state government, so it's I try to be very careful with what I say. But funding is an issue. Yeah, I would definitely say so. Mainly in the sense that you might have a very important office that opens up, and only one position in that office is actually funded by the state. Everything else is just, well, this is a time-limited role. Once any additional funding that we got to support this office and staff is done, then folks are out of a job, or, that's just the nature of how it is. Another thing is that it can be very difficult in order to serve the public when there are certain barriers that kind of come into place. For example, we're very lucky in the state of North Carolina to receive federal aid in the wake of COVID-19. And then you start to look at, okay, there's money here to do an assessment to see how COVID-19 impacted health disparities, social determinants of health across the state of North Carolina. Most of the state it's either metropolitan or it's rural. And in those rural areas is where you find a lot of the ethnic diversity that exists in the state. And in those pockets, you'll see okay, we have a very large American Indian population in the western part of the state. Their needs are very different from the people on the eastern part of the state who do very completely different things. How do we address those needs? And if you don't have the facilities to actually help the people that you're serving, then your job becomes extremely difficult. It becomes frustrating at times. And I think that having awareness of this and doing the best that you can within the system, doing the best you can that's allowed within your work is the best way to kind of keep that in your mind as you're doing different things that help folks. For example, something as simple as translation services. How do we get our public health messaging out to people? If it's cold and flu season coming up, as we're entering now in the fall, a hand washing campaign is very important, right? You should wash your hands, make sure you get your flu shot. Well, certain local health departments are calling the state level. We're in a decentralized, I don't want to get into nitty-gritty of things, but decentralized state. So we have both local health departments that run for the counties, and then we have the state level. But some of our local health departments are extremely, especially in poor counties, they're like, hey, we actually don't have anyone that can translate these messages in the various languages for the population or the people that are here. And then when they reach out to us, it's like, okay, what things can we do without kind of, stepping on people's toes and overstepping boundaries? So you have to be very tactful, but from that perspective, I can say that it's not a one size fits all solution, but money is very helpful. The more money you have, the more things you can get done. I would say, though. Yeah.
This is not anything specific to someplace I may have worked. It's just general knowledge of the museum and historic sites. And if you have a public institution, public relations is so important. And that's not something I never really was taught. But I think that would be as far as something you could teach students, public relations, whether that's taking a course in the business or the journalism school or something like that, because you want to get, if you've got a new exhibit, you want to let people know, how do you advertise, how do you get that word out there? And then there's always, when some kind of controversy, whether it's the issue that your institution talks about or some document that's discovered that's, threatens some organization or group or whatever, but it's just public relations is so important to get the funding and to get people in the door.
I think for me, and this is kind of the politics of institutions. So, whenever the Congress changes or the presidential administration changes, the basic fabric of the Park Service stays the same, but it's run by the Secretary of the Interior, and so that's a cabinet level position. And for the Belmont Paul site, it's a national monument, which is designated by the president, but it can be undesignated too. So there's not that permanence that a national park has. We interpret the history of the 19th Amendment there. We interpret the history of the Equal Rights Amendment, which is sort of still a political issue. The courts can decide that, but it's an ongoing political issue. So we have to be very careful in how we interpret that. And then, there's not an insignificant number of people who think the 19th Amendment should be repealed. So it's a matter of, whether those people get into positions where this sort of like anti-woke history, whatever you want to call it, it gets into these spaces of power that actually, prohibit us from telling certain stories. And I think that the Parks Service, though, has done a number of initiatives in the past, decade where they're really dedicated to telling diverse and challenging stories of our nation's history, both that, just are part of our history, but that also that the Park Service has been complicit in. There's a lot of studies going on now about how different national parks were segregated, and there's a lot of good work being done, but it's election season. Sometimes you get nervous, but yeah, there's the political nature of all of that.
I want to start by saying that I find the diversity on the panel today to be really inspiring in terms of kind of demonstrating the living work that we do and the way that history does in fact touch the lives of all of us on a daily basis. And even yesterday, I had a student in my classroom that when he was leaving, he told me he did not do well in his midterm because he's been busy focusing on his classes that are going to help him in his major for the career that he wants, which is, of course, just the dagger in the heart. But the question that I essentially have for you, and I think you've all spoke to it a little bit, but as instructors, as educators at various levels, what do you think is the most important skill that we can teach on, because we have so limited time, right? But what is one thing that you think we could focus on that would help students realize the marketability of the skills that we teach and what that means for a future career?
I'm not an educator per se, but I work with so many students at Arte Público, and I think a recurring theme at the end of each semester is helping students just talk about what they learned. And these students have done such incredible work, and then we ask them to kind of summarize, and around the table, and it's crazy that they really downplay what they've done, and they don't have the language. And it's been an eye-opener for us to realize it's something we need to be teaching. We need to actually set aside more time to help them use the right words and put emphasis in the right ways and really polish that part of their resume, that they're going to have to talk about their resume. You can't just send it in. You're going to have to do interviews. And unfortunately, that can make or break an opportunity. And it's something that my colleagues and I have been talking about, is how do we help get that skill across to our students so that they can really flourish in whatever area they want to by just learning how to describe what it is that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll try to tackle that a bit. I'm not an educator either, but we have a lot of internships that are available through the Division of Public Health, and I'm thinking of like one example. So we were able to create a really cool project, which was the first of its kind. It was a consortium of historically black colleges and universities, and giving them the opportunity to conduct research, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the first time that the state had partnered with any HBCU in that capacity. And so through that, we were able to give many student research opportunities through the many institutions that we partnered with. And through working with that project, I was able to meet the instructors and get to know them and build a rapport with them on a very close level, and meet their students that were working with them. And I would ask them, okay, like, well, what do you, as somebody on the state side of things, like, how can we help make this experience better for you? And a lot of times the instructors would say, wow, nobody ever actually asked me what would actually make my job easier. So I think that the best way to kind of try to answer that question would be, again, just letting the students know, for one, be proud of the work you do, mm-hmm. but also be vocal, be very intentional, and basically not to be timid with what you're doing. The work that you're doing as a student is setting yourself up for the next level of what you're going to do later in life, and it's very important to take even the student research or all of these opportunities very, very importantly. Because when you enter the workforce, folks are going to look at, they know you don't have a lot of work experience at this point. You're coming straight out of college, but what did you do in college, and how does that apply to what you're going to be doing for us? How are you going to help us? And if if you're not able to make that connection between how your work is important to not only yourself, but to whoever would be your future employer, then again, like you said, they might pass up on you because, oh, okay, well, this person doesn't have what we need. Yeah.
Can I just say something real quick? If they're concerned about making money, I can tell you that there are positions with history majors in the federal government making six figures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll just also jump in real quick. I think that showcasing, kind of helping our students make their skills legible right across the board, but also something that I think history work and public history especially teaches you is two things. Critical thinking, which much needed, right, in order to kind of sift through and assess, right, a particular event situation, political viewpoint, et cetera, especially in this age, when we have information, disinformation, and misinformation floating around in our daily lives. But also, I think that the most important critical skill that public history offers to our students is simplicity in our ideas and how we convey them, right? I always tell our students that sometimes in our history degree we we train ourselves to overcomplicate our ideas and thoughts and evidence, right? And sometimes it ends up looking like, what is even this sentence, right? But simplicity oftentimes, right, it's not dumbing down the information that you're conveying, but it is making it more accessible, right? And I think that goes back to that critical thinking, right? As historians, as public historians, we have a responsibility, right, to think about how we're presenting the histories that we are writing, right? And how are we representing people's voices, community histories, right, in a way that is not excluding them from, accessing it. Yeah.
So I'd like to give a huge thanks to our panelists and to Dr. Romero for a fabulous conversation, and also thank the audience for your thoughtful and powerful questions. So. At the Center for Public History and Houston History Magazine, we rely on the generous support of people like you who are equally committed to keeping Houston's history alive and supporting our mission of helping students learn valuable skills. If you liked what you heard this afternoon, please consider supporting us by subscribing to the Houston History Magazine or making a charitable contribution to CPH to support student success. To learn more, please scan the QR code on the back of your program or see me or see Hannah Barker, because we'd be happy to talk to you. You can also find us on social media, like us on Facebook, and follow us on X. Yeah, we're there. At UHCP History and at Hugh Hist Magazine. And we're also on Insta at UHCPH History. And if you want to get those, I can give them to you individually because, yeah, social media is more for my daughter than it is for me. It took a lot of people to make today's event happen. Thank you to our panelists, for it is them and the thousands more students they represent that we do this work. So really, thank you guys. A huge thanks to Dr. Wes Jackson and to Daniel Killian. Wave at the people so you can receive your thanks. And all the wonderful folks at UH Streaming Media, Renee Alfaro for his help with the audio-visual setup, Sylvia Molina and the Hilton staff for taking care of us all and hosting us and our catering needs. They gave us the lunch, so, thank them. The CPH lecture series for funding this event, Dr. Kathy Patterson, the chair of the history department, Dean Daniel P. O'Connor of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. We'll have a short break now. There is coffee, cookies, tea, and lemonade outside. And if you want more of the lunch, there's that food in the back as well. Please continue the conversation and consider returning for our next panel conversation that starts at 3 o'clock with former CPH directors. Please also return at 5 o'clock for our reception and 5:30 for our keynote address with Dr. Denise Maringolo. And finally, please mark your calendars for a book talk with Dr. Mary Ellen Curtin, who will be discussing her new biography of Barbara Jordan on November 7th. So thank you. Go eat cookies.